started her own studio called the Lifted Wing Studio, where she's all about uplifting the next generation with stories that entertain and educate.
Yes. So, forgive me for kind of turning here, okay? So, I'll really point out this bottom one here. So, these two images are from the same project. It's called Courage to Act. It's for the Unity Center at the California State Museum. And I was pretty much over pretty much all of the animation. So the studio that I was working with, they specialized in doing museum exhibits, but they didn't know how to do animation at all. So I was helping them with their storyboards, the scripts, getting character designs, the riggers, doing the animation. And it's all about standing up for victims, how to be able to identify someone who's a victim and the importance of saying something and doing something. So they just took everyday things like, if you hear someone making a off-color joke, you don't say anything. You should still kind of do something. Every little thing still matters. So it's an interactive animation exhibit. So you see the scenario, and you have bystanders that are watching the scenario, and you can choose which one you're going to use to respond to the situation. So that's one of my favorites. I really like that. Then this one up here, it was just about this deeper experience in terms of, my faith is a big part of what I do. So this was about, meditation and going deeper into the things that you find through meditation. And this one's from my short film. It's called Lita, and that was traveling all around the U.S. and it played in Brazil and Toronto. So this is a little bit of my work. And I guess this is an article from a podcast.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one because prior to this, Davonne used to also volunteer with ASIFA, and then she was doing a podcast, which we were doing as an experiment about labor of love for, was it Black History Month?
Yes.
As well too. And then it actually, some people from ASIFA in a different country was picking it up, and also in Maryland. And they were saying, wow, this is a really good podcast, about especially the professor was a part of ASIFA International, and she was trying to encourage people to know about diversity and inclusion, but because she's not from the minority group, she's like, how do we get more information about this? So she picked up the podcast, and she actually had the students kind of write about it too. So there was a student that actually wrote about Davonne's podcast, and how they felt like they learned a lot about the side of things that the myth of also debunking some of the stigma about the animation industry and its part in refusing minorities and things like that as well too. Because Davonne was giving her own type of experiences and what she felt was good and what she felt could be done better as well.
Yes, I had no idea this article was out there.
So it does make an impact. That's the thing. It's you don't know what you're doing or what you're creating and how much of an impact it makes with other people until someone actually says, hey, I really appreciate this, or I think this gave me a really good starting point from a different point of view as well too. Yeah. So let's also take a look at Jules' stuff here too. Jules, what is this?
This is just kind of some samples I wanted to give. Nothing quite as illuminated or prestigious as Davonne's stuff quite yet, but mainly just a lot of just studies that I like to do. I kind of wanted to show people a little bit of just my general style and energy and shape language. And yeah, just kind of doing some different studies of different types of faces and bodies and relationships in general.
And I know that in your comic you had one called the magic flute too, right?
Yeah, that one's actually it's called Gino now, which is an exciting twist. But yeah, I'm working on a comic that's going to be kind of in this style about a little psychic child that can talk to this demon velociraptor. It's pretty wild. It's pretty crazy. But it's sort of still in development, but a lot of this is kind of style studies for the direction I'm going to take it in. Yeah, unfortunately I can't show anything from Floyd.
That's totally fine.
And I don't have my own studio yet or any kind of publications yet, but I just kind of thought it'd be fun to show a little flavor of kind of how I see.
But also, being a character designer, I think there's a question, how do you stay away from stereotypes while still because when you're designing characters, a lot of times the people will say, oh, certain characters look like this, certain characters act like that. How do you avoid stereotypes, but also keep your character archetypes and stuff as well too?
For me, the biggest thing has just been referencing real people, and referencing from life and real stories, and not trying to guess at what someone's experience is going to be, or make assumptions on what is typical or atypical. Like really trying to get the widest pool of reference that you can. There's a lot of with the internet now too, there's a lot of, sorry, I'm going to face the audience. There's a lot of, I'm just like back turning, horrible stage presence. There's so many great references too, with like just so many different faces that you can scroll through, like world catalogs of people, and you can really get an exploration of stuff. I really like Janelle Monáe a lot. Like if you could see that girl on the right, it's like very inspired by her. But just really trying to keep like your interests really broad and really kind of just going with styles and influences that fascinate you, and even just realizing that there's so many other ways of looking at art and fashion than just the little world that you live in, and really being open to kind of exploring other modes like that.
And I would say too, like if you guys have any questions and comments, feel free to jump in, because like it's like having a conversation. And basically we also definitely want to know about you guys and your backgrounds and why you're interested in this conversation in the first place as well too. And I also wanted to kind of show you guys a bit of their work as well too, what they're working on personal works as well. And Davonne just not too recently, but kind of also recently, started her own studio called the Lifted Wing Studio, where she's all about uplifting the next generation with stories that entertain and educate.
Yes. So, forgive me for kind of turning here, okay? So, I'll really point out this bottom one here. So, these two images are from the same project. It's called Courage to Act. It's for the Unity Center at the California State Museum. And I was pretty much over pretty much all of the animation. So the studio that I was working with, they specialized in doing museum exhibits, but they didn't know how to do animation at all. So I was helping them with their storyboards, the scripts, getting character designs, the riggers, doing the animation. And it's all about standing up for victims, how to be able to identify someone who's a victim and the importance of saying something and doing something. So they just took everyday things, like if you hear someone making a off-color joke, you don't say anything. You should still kind of do something. Every little thing still matters. So it's an interactive animation exhibit. So you see the scenario, and you have bystanders that are watching the scenario, and you can choose which one you're going to use to respond to the situation. So that's one of my favorites. I really like that. Then this one up here, it was just about this deeper experience in terms of, my faith is a big part of what I do. So this was about, meditation and going deeper into the things that you find through meditation. And this one's from my short film. It's called Letha, and that was traveling all around the U.S. and it played in Brazil and Toronto. So this is a little bit of my work. And I guess this is an article from a podcast.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting one, because prior to this, Davonne used to also volunteer with ASIFA, and then she was doing a podcast, which we were doing as an experiment about labor of love for was it Black History Month?
Yes.
As well too, and then it actually some people from ASIFA in a different country was picking it up, and also in Maryland. And they were saying, wow, this is a really good podcast, about especially the professor was a part of ASIFA International, and she was trying to encourage people to know about diversity and inclusion, but because she's not from the minority group, she's like, how do we get more information about this? So she picked up the podcast, and she actually had students kind of write about it too. So there was a student that actually wrote about Davonne's podcast, and how they felt like they learned a lot about the side of things that the myth of also debunking some of the stigma about the animation industry and its part in refusing minorities and things like that as well too. Because Davonne was giving her own type of experiences and what she felt was good, and what she felt could be done better as well.
Yes, I had no idea this article was out there.
So it does make an impact. That's the thing. It's you don't know what you're doing or what you're creating and how much of an impact it makes with other people until someone actually says, hey, I really appreciate this, or I think this gave me a really good starting point from a different point of view as well too. Yeah. So let's also take a look at Jules' stuff here too. Jules, what is this? Madness.
This is just kind of some samples I wanted to give. Nothing quite as illuminated or prestigious as Davonne's stuff quite yet, but mainly just a lot of just studies that I like to do. I kind of wanted to show people a little bit of just my general style and energy and shape language. And yeah, just kind of doing some different studies of different types of faces and bodies and relationships in general.
And I know that like in your comic you had like one called the magic flute too, right?
Yeah, that one's actually it's called Gino now, which is an exciting twist. But yeah, I'm working on a comic that's going to be kind of in this style about a little psychic child that can talk to this demon velociraptor. It's pretty wild. It's pretty crazy. But it's sort of still in development, but a lot of this is kind of like style studies for the direction I'm gonna take it in. Yeah, unfortunately I can't show anything from Floyd.
That's totally fine.
And I don't have my own studio yet or any kind of like publications yet, but I just kind of thought it'd be fun to show a little flavor of kind of how I see.
But also, being a character designer, I think there's a question, like how do you stay away from stereotypes while still because when you're designing characters, a lot of times the people will say, oh, certain characters look like this, certain characters act like that. How do you avoid stereotypes, but also like keep your character like archetypes and stuff as well too?
For me, the biggest thing has just been referencing real people, and referencing from life and real stories, and not trying to guess at what someone's experience is going to be or make assumptions on what is typical or atypical. Like really trying to get the widest pool of reference that you can. There's a lot of with the internet now too, there's a lot of, sorry, I'm going to face the audience. There's a lot of, I'm just back turning, horrible stage presence. There's so many great references too with just so many different faces that you can scroll through, world catalogs of people, and you can really get an exploration of stuff. I really like Janelle Monáe a lot. If you could see that girl on the right, it's very inspired by her. But just really trying to keep your interests really broad and really kind of just going with styles and influences that fascinate you, and even just realizing that there's so many other ways of looking at art and fashion than just the little world that you live in, and really being open to kind of exploring other modes like that.
And I would say too, if you guys have any questions and comments, feel free to jump in because it's like having a conversation. And basically, we also definitely want to know about you guys and your backgrounds and why you're interested in this conversation in the first place as well too. But first, we're gonna take a look at something pretty cool. And recently, I think most people might have heard about the Oscar-winning animated short, Hair Love. And has everybody seen it yet or not yet? Okay, don't worry. We're actually gonna watch 6 minutes of this, by the way. We're gonna watch it in full and give it the respect that it needs because we're gonna be discussing it in a little bit. Because Davonne's friends were working on this animation too, so she's brought some insights about this particular animation. Do you want to preface anything before I start, or later?
Later.
Okay. So let's actually watch it and take this in first. Man, all the feels. So for people who just came in, the reason we're playing this particular animation is also because, like I said, one of our guests, Davonne, she has some friends who worked on this and would like to give some insight about it. But first, just to preface this, I used to cut my own hair. And so I've cut a couple of my friends' hairs. And that was all in Thailand, where I came from. And then when I got here, I had a friend who's black. And she was like, yeah, I'm trying to cut my hair and stuff. I was like, I can do it. I've done it before. Yes, and so she's like, yeah, I think you'll be fine, because all she wanted was, she kind of wanted just a little bit of buzz, a buzz. She's like, yeah, just some buzz and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I can do this. It turned out a wreck. It was a mess. And that was the first time that I realized, I was like, oh my God. I was like, I don't know anything about other people's hair. I know my own hair, and I know something, and then also it was such a big conversation that I had with my other friend Tam, where initially when I came to the US, I was like, ooh, hair, so nice, can I touch it? I can see some people are cringing, but that's a thing too. It's then you just ooh, let me touch it type of thing. So, but that's not what you're supposed to do. And it's also that I found out that it took a really long time like to get your hair done. Like my friend says, I'm gonna do my hair. I was like, okay, sure, let's meet after lunch. She's like, no, I'm gonna do my hair. And it meant that it's gonna take the whole day to do your hair. And I was like, oh wow, like there's so many things that when you're not talking about, you don't realize, and you're like, whoa, I have no idea. So Davonne, do you want to speak a little bit on that?
That's hilarious. Yeah, I can't believe she. Anyway, well, Ginger, that's a funny story about cutting your friend's hair. So, hair love. So, funny story about this is that I backed the Kickstarter years ago. I was like, oh, this is gonna be great, you know. And a friend of mine that I worked with at Bento Box, she was the illustrator, Vashti Harrison. She illustrated the children's book. So first it was a children's book, Hair Love. And then they started a Kickstarter like, hey, we're gonna make this into an animation. And before, I don't think Matthew Cherry knew it was gonna get as big as it is now. I think it was just this kind of passion project that he had starting out with. And I just remember it was taking a while for things to kind of move on. I think the Kickstarter was back in 2017, something like that, 2018, something like that. And basically, Vashti Harrison, the illustrator on the book, and Matthew Cherry were doing a book tour for Hair Love. And they came to Atlanta, and I'm like, oh, I want to go because I'm friends with Vashti, and I want to say hi and be supportive. And then so when I saw her, we were talking, she's like, oh, you should talk to Matthew because he probably needs animators on this film. I'm like, that's nice, probably not really, you know, just because now at this point he's working with Sony Animation, you know, and like all these bigger people. I'm just kind of like, okay. And then I got a chance to talk to him, and we were talking a little bit back and forth, and then they actually emailed me like, hey, can you help us out on this? So long story short, you know, things kind of fell through. You know, I'm not salty because now I won an Oscar, right? But I just remember talking with Matthew, and he was talking about just some of the thoughts in terms of, you know, he was going around looking at these YouTube videos now of dads doing their daughter's hair, you know, and them kind of dancing and making fun, making a whole experience out of it, you know, and there's this connection. So he wanted to make this film kind of talking about that. And he was talking about even designs for the dad, like what kind of restrictions were they going to put on how these characters need to look, you know, how would they feel about having a black man with dreads, you know, not only with dreads, but with tattoos also. You know, he's not like this button up kind of what you would think of as I guess, safe or approachable type of person. So he was talking about some of his thoughts about that and just like how far he could push it, you know, to make this. And I really like how it turned out, you know, and obviously with him winning the award that it's been received pretty well. But I think it's just been great just seeing the kind of showcase that it's gotten, the kind of recognition that Hair Love has gotten. So, yeah.
And now I'm gonna go for a hard question. So sometimes when like these kind of shorts come out and they're very like specific topic, some people are like, they just won because it's a diversity minority kind of ticket on it. You know, it's like, oh, if it is like, is it based on its merit or is it based on its story? And you always hear about like reverse racism as well. So what do you think about? What are your thoughts on that?
On reverse racism and why this one kind of, well, I think it's kind of one of those stories that just needs to be told. You know, it's kind of even from your experience, not most people know how much time it takes to do like a certain type of hair, you know, and how it's a really big deal. And I think, I guess, I wouldn't say it's reverse racism because when I think of racism, I also think of like kind of the social construct and you having some sort of authority, like where your place is in society having authority over that person. So it's kind of like anyone who's in a minority type of position technically can't, you know, have some sort of superiority over, you know, some of the other races. So, so I don't think it's reverse racism. I just think it's opening this door of like, hey, you know, this is, you know, another story, and I think there's enough room for everyone's story to shine. So just because this one has gotten the chance to get this award, that doesn't mean there's any less opportunity from anyone else to get in recognition.
Definitely. And also the other thing too, it's a pretty global story. I mean, like people can usually relate to, you know, like, oh, you're a dad and then you have a daughter, or you're a mom, you have a kid, and then you're just trying to figure things out as well too. So I think like the appeal of it is really interesting, because we did mention this like in a conversation, because Parasite came up before as well too. And when we were talking about Parasite, some people were like, Joker should have won. What's with Parasite? And I think this is based more like subjectively on what you're interested in and what calls to you more. But in terms of the fact that it's like, oh, Parasite won, is it because, you know, like it's like the Oscar has been getting a like pushback of saying, oh, it's so white, and so therefore they decided to like push something out that is different or new. Because I know a lot of people that I saw on my personal Facebook was like, oh, I hope this would win, but I don't think it will, based on
those posts, yeah.
Yeah, type of thing as well too. So now when we're talking about like the different stories, because personally for me, Parasite had a really good storytelling construct. Everything had like layers and depth to it, but it also, sometimes that doesn't come through when you're actually showing the animation, the final product of something. So for example, if we're looking at the final product of Hair Love, we'll be like, okay, this is a great story. But you know that as animators, there's more layers and research that goes into it. And sometimes because it's such a cultural part of it, that like if you're not in that situation, you don't really understand what's going on. That I feel like, what do you think should be done in terms of like, you know, like recognizing that, hey, this is a story that not everybody knows about, or certain special aspects that like are overlooked. How do you think there's a better way for the people to convey that to the audience when you're doing this kind of thing?
That's a tough question. I really don't know, because I think there's always going to be people that are a group that doesn't understand, and that's kind of why it is a film. And I think it's just more exposure to it and more opportunities to learn will help others understand. So I think even these types of videos and showing these types of films, it's giving people an opportunity to be exposed and kind of get a little snippet, or even spark conversation with others and say, hey, you know, can you tell me more about this? I've never heard of this before.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to add too that like you said, it kind of enters like the social consciousness, and you even have like the Crown Act right now that's being passed like in different states, protecting people's right to wear natural hair in the workplace and at schools, because that's still a problem that people are facing. And so having something like this come to the surface and show this beautiful side and this family element and this like human element behind hair and the sense of identity with it, I think it just coincides really, really well with like this legislation that's happening at the same time. So I think a lot of times like art as well can have that political, in a good way, like can really help social change move forward, because people have a human side to an issue that they might not have otherwise, you know, really realized.
And I think like with one of the things I would commend Netflix on is bringing more interesting stories that are not always like super mainstream. But also like I think the other question that we also have is that when you're like if somebody says, you know what, I want to bring more diverse story to the table, but I'm not of that minority group, or like I want to bring exposure to this and that. What do you think a good approach would be? Like what to do and what absolutely not to do?
Oh man. I mean, there's so many things like not to do, but like I guess we could be more positive and think about like what to do. I guess some of the things that are just I guess we could start with kind of things don't do, especially for like LGBT characters. If you're not. A lot of people have like this fascination with trans people, and they want to tell stories about us like in our transition. And for a lot of us, like, yeah, that's an element of our lives, and that is something we go through. But we also have jobs and families and relationships, and we're people. And you know, we have like well-rounded worlds and complexities that we, you know, that like being trans is a part of our story, but it's not our only story. So I think a lot of times just like making your character, like if they are part of a, you know, a marginalized group of people, like that can absolutely be an element of it. And I encourage people to create characters beyond themselves and research those people's lives and really understand what they're going through. But I don't think people should write a story about like oppression if they don't experience that oppression. Like, or at least I think it's going to be very like dangerous kind of territory to do if you don't personally understand what that experience is. I think a lot of times it's like your best bet is to just kind of like incorporate this element into the character's story, but not have it be their entire story. It's kind of like how you write any other person, I guess. So like that's, and I guess like the big, you know, don'ts is basically, I mean, at least with trans people, like just reading up about the vocabulary that is preferred and the way that a lot of us like to talk about ourselves and our pasts and our futures, and kind of avoiding certain vocabulary and certain ways of thinking about us that can be very toxic. And another thing to consider, I'm rambling, but like another thing to consider is your own privilege as an author, and whether you want to be the one telling this story or whether you'd rather uplift another writer that actually experiences these things, or at least maybe collaborate with someone. So yeah, you know, there's a lot of nuances to it, and it's not quite black and white of like, you can never do this or you should always do this, but it's just something that you really have to proceed with care and with honesty, and not just because you're fascinated with this group of people or that you find it, you know, interesting as a story element, but rather just that you feel like that's who your character is and you want that to be an element of their own story, I guess. I don't know. It's a big issue for sure.
Yeah, I like everything that you shared in terms of, you know, this is a whole person, you know?
Yeah.
I remember I saw this post on social media. I can't remember everything it said, but one of the things that stood out to me was like, diversity is really having, you know, a multitude of people at the decision-making table. You know,
sure.
It's not just, okay, we have the main character is black or, you know, transgender. It's like, are the people who are writing the stories, are they a part of this community? Do they understand this? And even throughout the entire organization, you know, is that included in there? So I think it really just comes to not only what we see on screen, but who's actually a part of making the content and making the decisions. So.
Oh yeah, and if I can add to that as well, that even thinking about, because even if you don't work in an animation studio right now, or even if you are, you know, working freelance, working alone, you don't really get a lot of contact with other people. Even thinking about whatever your workplace is, trying to make it more inclusive in general, especially animation, like at Floyd in particular, we've been kind of having this little movement to make it mandatory to use people's correct pronouns and not just be like, I forgot, like 60 times. So yeah, like we're trying to actually kind of make it like part of the, like it's mandated to respect people like that. And so thinking about as even a whole, like you said, including people in writing stories, and even thinking about who's going to be making this, and are those studios also considering these needs of all these different communities. Because it's the irony a lot of times that marginalized people have to work on things that include them but don't represent them accurately. But they need to make, you know, they need to pay the bills, so they have to work on this project. But a lot of times it's just like, if you had just asked us, like somebody could have caught this for you. If anybody on your team, you know, wasn't this super mainstream person.
Definitely. And the other reason, Jules, you're not just here because of the LGBT thing too as well, but there's also another thing called hidden disabilities. You know, we want to talk about this as well because in animation, a lot of times, and these are also anecdotal, but a lot of times there's an office space, it's like, you know, a working table, and you sit down for a very long amount of time, and some people develop back problems, some people develop hand issues. So one of the things that we've also found in a lot of times in animation industry as well too, there's a lot of hidden disabilities. Like, for example, like if you have problems with your back, and you can't sit down at a table for like the amount of hours they ask you to. Is this something that's also being addressed or not? Because it's unseen. It's something that you don't have as well too. So Jules, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh sure. Yes. Other things. Yeah, I do also have like it got to a point where it did become kind of a disability that I have really severe scoliosis, which a lot of people have scoliosis. It's like, yeah, it's not that you know, exceptional, but for me it increased to a point where it was not like life-threatening, but causes really severe chronic pain, and nothing can really be done besides just kind of maintaining it. But it does cause like severe pain, like for long amounts of time sitting, and I have trouble like walking long distances and stuff like that. And a lot of people kind of sort of laugh at it and go like, oh, have you tried yoga? You know, have you tried like this like herb? And it's like, yeah, you know, we do that. But there's some things that you can't change and some things we actually just do need accommodations for. So, you know, as my back kind of like became worse and worse over the years, I sort of saw into this world of hidden disabilities and how little people actually take them seriously and realize there are something that needs to be addressed. Because for a lot of us, we think like if we want to keep our job or we want to keep our place in the industry, we can't show that weakness, quote unquote, or we can't seem like we can't keep up with people, which is not true because we absolutely can keep up. A lot of times we work like twice as hard because we're trying so hard to really like prove ourselves. But yeah, just having a lot of people not realize that it's a legitimate concern, and there's such a broad range of that the term hidden disability can include, like, you know, from being on the spectrum, having any kind of physical, like having hearing impairment, that things that you don't want to necessarily be outed for having, but you also want the assumption the community is going to accept you. So that's definitely been sort of something nice about working at Floyd in particular, is like I told them right away, like, I do have trouble, like, is there any kind of accommodations? And they're like, yeah, we can get you a special chair that will help you with pain for long amounts of time, and that was super helpful. So making sure that your workplace and that the studios in particular are pushing towards that, and that people are not seeing it as, and that even ties in with that mentality that you should, that kind of toxic mentality that happens with artists, that we have to like work ourselves to death, and that, you know, we're not done, and like sleep is for the dead, like no. So like even, you know, totally able-bodied people have that mentality, but it can become very toxic when, and even, you know, able-bodied people can develop a hidden disability in some way or some kind of chronic pain. And just knowing that, like, working towards a place where studios are allowing your body to not be absolutely flawless for you to continue working there, and realizing that you have valuable things to bring to the table if they can just provide you the physical accommodations that you need. That's the direction we're hopefully trying to move in. It's definitely much better than it used to be, but it's something that people just need to realize is a serious kind of issue that's not totally being addressed the way it needs to.
Definitely, and like in our own organization, we also have a lot of people who are on the spectrum as well too, so we try to accommodate for that. But I think the most important thing about inclusion and also like fostering kind of diversity is to go beyond where you are. Like get into a space where you might not feel comfortable. You kind of have to get uncomfortable if you want to actually have a quality conversation about actually making something inclusive. Because we can't talk about things we don't know, and we won't know unless we ask or we do our researches as well too. So how do you think, like, you know, if people are interested, they're like, oh, you know, we want to respect the LGBT community, but Googling on Google, like, I don't know how to address this and that. Like, do you have any advice for that? Or also, like, you know, like when we're like approaching different conversations and topics about like difficult topics that is not part of your own culture, how do you respectfully go about adding that to your own conversation?
I mean, that's a great question. Would you like to contribute any thoughts to the question?
Sure, please.
Or I mean, I can answer like a little bit.
Yeah,
a second.
a little bit.
Okay, yeah. It's just such a big, like, it's just such a, I mean, it's a great question. And it's like kind of an enormous question because each of us is only really one person in our own lives. And I think also the important thing to remember is no one of us represents our entire community that we belong to. Like each person is totally unique from the next, and we have shared experiences within our communities, but we're all still highly unique. So again, like just because you ask one person something and they say this is okay, or you know, this works for me, doesn't mean it's necessarily going to fly with the whole community once it's accepted or once, you know, your stuff is published. But I think finding online spaces that are actually run by people in the community, and really reading like firsthand stories, firsthand experiences, and taking those stories seriously and believing the narrators and the voices of those stories to be legitimate, is definitely a step in the right direction of trying to like I mean, the resources are there just to find people, and even just meeting more people in person, which is hard for us to do because we work a lot. But yeah, but you know, like we love to like hole up in a cave and be bat people. Like we love it. But but yeah, just meeting more people in general, and again, realizing that each person is an individual and that your character is also an individual and isn't going to just be a blanket representation of this whole group. And you shouldn't try to make them be that either. Like you shouldn't try to encapsulate every experience that you've heard from everyone into this one person.
You should just try to stay away from starter packs.
Yes.
Try to say starter packs. It's like, oh, this is a doctor. The doctor's gonna look like this. He's got glasses.
Yeah.
He's got this kind of thing. But like,
Right.
if you actually talk to somebody who's a real doctor and you find actually somebody who is interesting, they could totally look different from what you imagined them to be. But you can like, hey, can I base my character off you? That's usually a pretty safe bet, because if somebody comes up and tell you, hey, that doesn't look like our doctor, I was like, oh yeah, be my friend Jim, who's a doctor right here.
Oh, Jim. Dr. Jim.
Yeah, I like everything that you were saying in terms of like talking to one person, that's their experience. You know, you're not talking, we are not the representative for, you know, our like
Yeah, we're not a
respective
monolith.
groups.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that, just answering your original question, is just, I would just come with a genuine, like, open conversation, like, hey, I don't know much about this, and I just want to understand, you know, or, and recognize that we all internally have our own natural biases, you know, and being okay with those being challenged, you know, and recognizing that we have those, you know, and that, yeah, just try to come open to say like, hey, you know, I'm coming because I care, and just showing a genuine interest in getting to know that person. And yeah, usually I like the doctor example, you know, not this people aren't going to fit into the stereotypical box. That's how we tend to like box people into these places, but recognizing that each and every person is an individual. There are some commonalities that maybe certain cultures share just because they have maybe a shared experience, but each individual person has their own uniqueness. So I would say to learn more, I would say talk to someone, meet someone, you know. Like it's a great experience, a great reason to get from in front of the computer, you know, and from doing work and just sitting down and talking with people and having a great conversation and, you know, building those friendships.
Yeah.
So.
For some of you guys on this panel too, I would love to know what you guys, you know, like why are you here in the first place as well too? Because whenever we have something that's like really broad, as in like, oh, women in animation, inclusion and diversity, like what do you want to actually, like when you're in a panel, what do you want to know about? Like what do you think are the things that are never really usually answered on a panel that you wish that we go more into? Like if you have any, just.
Should we bring the microphone to?
Yeah, we can bring a microphone. I can bring you a microphone. If you're comfortable with it, this will.
Okay, Al. I might as well volunteer.
Dominique.
I'll go first.
Hi, my name is Dominique. I am a ASIFA-South member. I'm an events coordinator here, but I'm going to answer your question. I actually want to piggyback off what you both said. You should always ask. Before you assume, ask. I'm not going to pretend to be you. I'm going to ask you to get real information, raw material that's true and reflects the story correctly. That's all I have to say. But yeah, I came here because I support the mission of ASIFA, and I support inclusion and diversity, and also as a Black woman, I would say I try to represent the community by coming to these events and coming here and stepping out of my comfort zone. Because I love animation, I love cartoons, I love stories that make sense. And I don't know, I've watched more cartoons than I did, you know, reality TV. Yeah, so that's why I'm here, so to learn. I didn't go to school for animation, went to school for art.
Just like add something I really like about what Dominique said. What are you doing?
Trying to say her question.
Dominique has such a wonderful, joyful life, and everyone should be like her. No, it's good. something I really like about what you said is like not like you like a well-told story where the character actually feels like it makes sense. And I think something kind of like that's important to remember is to not bend your character to fit the world or to fit the story that you're like attached to telling, but like make everything else bend to the character and to what real people do and what real people need. That's gonna help you avoid tropes in a lot of times. But yeah, just kind of jumping off.
Definitely, because I mean, in storytelling, sometimes you'll watch some, not just animation, we're talking about film languages, that you'll be like, this character just made the dumbest decision running into a haunted house for no good reason when they know there's something that's happening. And it becomes something that makes you feel like not engaged in the story because you're like, that decision doesn't seem like a decision that, and it happens so often and so over that you're like, oh, that doesn't seem something like that would be real or it's engaging as well too. So I think like that does build to that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I keep having like thoughts while you're talking. And also like, there's a huge untapped base of people like out there that don't see themselves in things that get really excited when we see ourselves in things. And I think people, even just like from a business standpoint, people are still just learning that like we love to see ourselves, we need to see ourselves as a human element. Like you can't be what you can't see kind of thing. And I'm so excited for like children that get to see hair love, like it makes me like, oh. Like all the little kids that are gonna grow up feeling more positive, feeling more seen and represented in general. Like it's such a good direction to go in, and I just feel like it's exciting to see people starting to realize that we're here too, and our stories are just as valid and actually a lot more interesting. Like a lot of people are always kind of complaining that things are the same and stories are the same and characters are the same. It's like it's kind of because we're only using the same type of people over and over and over. And there's only so many variations on that you can get. So it's exciting to see things moving towards that direction.
Yeah. I think so. Did you want to say something?
Oh, me?
Yeah, I thought.
I'm just listening.
Oh, yes, Georgia.
You're very engaged. It's good.
I just was curious about how diverse would you say the studios or the projects that you've worked on, what is that room looks like?
Oh, that's it.
Usually, one thing that I've noticed is there usually aren't a lot of, most studios that I've worked at, it's still predominantly white male. And even specifically those in the higher positions, like the directors, art directors, and those, they usually tend to be white males. You know, you'll see more diverse people, say, in the lower levels, maybe in-betweeners, key animators, leads, and things like that. But overall, I'm not going to name any places, but yeah, I definitely have been where I'm like the only black woman usually there, and maybe there's one other black guy, or maybe two, and then I think I see even less like Latin people, or I don't know about the LGBT, you know,
Very hidden.
yes.
Very hidden.
So I'm like, I don't know.
Very sneaky. Yeah.
But it's definitely, you definitely feel like a minority, you know? And I definitely say like, oh, I'm the only one, okay? And yeah, so that's what it looks like in the studio most of the time.
Yeah, for sure. And oh my God, yeah. 100%. And I think like a big thing for it too is not just, like we don't just want jobs in the industry, we want ownership of our work. And an oversight of our work, and I think that's where it comes in that like the people in the most powerful positions are still predominantly, white males, usually like able-bodied white guys, which of course like there's nothing wrong with being that person, but it's going to come at a cost to your studio if you don't have diverse voices running it, and you don't have a larger group, and what happens is like people have this sense of crisis of not truly feeling like they belong there, or like they it's hard to stay motivated when you feel like you're the only one. And sometimes you can get that feeling of like, I have to represent everyone and all of my actions are going to reflect this whole community and no one else here has to deal with that necessarily. So really working towards a place where we're not just working to tell stories of people more privileged than us, but like working to a place where we actually can own the work and the stories that we tell, I think is really important. Because a lot of times like people will sort of be like, well, we met our quota, we hired, like not directly say that.
1, 2,
but
3, there you go.
I've had some interesting, I wish I was exaggerating, but I have had some interesting experiences. And again, like I'm a white person, so I still can't even speak on the like dynamics of dealing with race in the workplace. But I've had people be like, you're one of them that I can talk to,
One
kind
of
of
the
thing
minorities,
about.
2 of the minorities.
Yeah, like, well, you said it was
Minorities.
okay, and it's like, ooh. But yeah, it's still definitely a problem of people kind of like putting all of that onto one person's shoulders. And that can be very alienating. That can be very bad for the quality of the work that you produce and how you feel belonging in that place. So just moving more towards a place of
Definitely,
ownership.
and like I know like let's go to you and then you next as well too. But also like I've also worked with advertising agencies, and sometimes when you're in there and then you see things come out and you're like, what were they thinking? That's exactly what they were thinking, like, not thinking. Yeah, because I was involved in like at an agency where they had this campaign about Chick-fil-A, and it had the one where it's like, oh, chicken sandwich is not as crazy as you think. So they tried to bring out like inventors, and then they brought like Thomas Edison, like Susan B. Anthony and stuff, and then we were all going looking like, huh, that's interesting. Like it looks like the same type of palette, basically, when it came out, and the campaign was super amazing. But at the round table, I was also looking while they're like kind of discussing it a bit, and I was like, wow, they kind of look the same-ish too. But in terms of what they're talking about studio, even my studio, like the people who are making the decisions, making the deals right now are still white men. And it's just because, you know, history takes time to catch up sometimes. And also one of the things that I did while I was a computer animation festival producer was that when I was talking to the chairs, and the chairs are also men, and then you're like, oh yeah, let's get these people, my friend, and oh, I know one woman.
I know one of them.
Yeah. But when it comes to that, it's that's the thing. You know, the conversation goes to, I'm going to take my friend in, but if your group of friends is not diverse in the first place, that's really, really hard.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine who was at Kids Screen, and he was just talking, you know, that's where they pitch children's content, you know, that's going to be on PBS and all that. And all the people that are at the heads are, you know, white males, you know, making all these decisions. And it's all about who you know. Like, if they don't know you, they're not really gonna listen. And so, and even with you mentioning like my friend, I even noticed like in studios, like they're all hanging out together outside of, you know, the studio and talking about things. So they're also, you know, when that position opens, you know, they're gonna choose their friend. They're gonna choose the person they're already hanging out with all the time. So it almost feels like, man, I'm not a part of that club. So I'm like, how am I gonna, you know, fit there, you know? And
for sure.
So that's some things that
And you can't quite get there without playing their game a little bit and assimilating in a weird way and kind of losing a piece of yourself, which is weird. Yeah, which you don't want to have to do.
So, I hope it's not too confusing.
No.
My name's Keisha.
Hi,
Everyone. So it's kind of a two-part question. First question is, have you ever felt like the urgency or the call for diversity stifles your work in some way, or your creativity? Like you have to walk on eggshells, or you can express certain truths that are actually true for you, because you feel like you have to be politically correct. And then the second part, kind of unrelated, but do you think that it's possible to tell the stories of minorities or oppressed groups of people without mention of that aspect of the challenge or whatever? I mean, like even in this story, there's kind of, at least from my perception, like her hair is difficult in some way, which is not true for everyone, or that's not really how I perceive it. And I feel like the majority of the stories that are told, and I think it's important to tell the stories of the challenges, the difficulties, the oppression, and all of that. But then I also think it could be really powerful, as both of you said, in some way to just like show people as whole people. I guess Parasite kind of does that, because I've only watched half of it, but I don't feel like there's any like direct reference or some kind of agenda regarding their race per se. It's just a story, and the characters are Korean. So
That's, I mean, unless you want to answer, but I have. Okay, so I'm like, oh.
I mean, you can go first.
Okay, I'm very awkward. Those are great questions. Absolutely great questions, and I totally agree with you. I think in particular, like the Oscars and really white male institutions such as the Oscars, I really love like people's I don't know. I feel like they're still very attracted to stories that in some way involve oppression. Like they don't seem to just want to hear a story about marginalized people unless it's about their oppression. Or even better, if someone not from that group is playing, like, especially with disability, it's kind of a hot button issue, but like people playing disability or people doing things, they're always like, this is so amazing that they studied this and they've really immersed themselves in the story. And it's like every disabled person kind of hates it. Like, so it's like the people you're actually talking about really hate this. So what good is this? But it's sort of very self-congratulatory kind of cycle. So I totally agree. It's very frustrating to see. Like, I absolutely love that this story won an Oscar and is being paid attention to, and it's wonderful, it's beautiful, and it's so celebratory and positive. But at the same time, I agree. I want to see more girls with this hair in everything. Like, it shouldn't have to be about her hair for her to have this hairstyle. It shouldn't have to be about the oppression that our groups face for us to be in the story. Like, I don't know, there's always that issue with, like, you know, in outer space and sci-fi and everything, it's like there's no white people like in a million galaxies away. There might be, I don't know, but there's no other really human beings out there, and yet people have no problem imagining like white people doing all these things. It's like, why not include all human beings out in space, out in fantasy environments, out in, especially like just all of these really fantastical kind of genres where you still see a mainly like white dominated cast. It's just kind of like open your imagination a little bit, and you're already making so many leaps to build this world, and yet your cast is still so
I think we said that, you know, like the Scarlett Johansson deal, the big hot button issue kind of thing.
Exactly.
And also like when people are playing like other groups and stuff as well too. I think the main thing is that like it's not as much that they are saying that, you know, like, oh, we're against certain things, but it's also that, hey, this role could also be like, you know, go to somebody who doesn't have that opportunity as well.
Exactly. It's a lost opportunity for someone that's already so overlooked that could have played that character. But
yeah, the first thing I thought, the second part of your question, part of me was just thinking like, I think they're thinking about what sells. You know, I think that's really the bottom line. They're like, what's going to get us the most money? You know, not necessarily what needs to be said or shown all the time. And then to answer your first question about have I ever felt like I was falling into it or trying to avoid a stereotype, was it something like that?
yeah, like your creativity was stifled in some way.
My creativity being stifled. I guess inadvertently in terms of, you know, when you're at the studio and you're this only black person, you know, it's kind of like, I need to be on my best behavior, you know, almost. And it's kind of like this ingrained because you see how you're portrayed on television, like the angry black woman. That's my personal thing. Like, I do not want to come across as this angry black person, you know, because my impression of how I'd be received is that if I come across as emotional or upset about something, then nothing I say is going to be heard after that. So it's just, okay, you know, how can I be the most polite and communicate the best way I can what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, And so I think in that way that does kind of stifle my creativity because I'm so aware of how I'm being received. You know, I'm hyper aware of how I'm being received and how I need to be, you know, how I need to behave, you know, and it's, the whole thing, this is kind of off on the tangent, it's not just in the studio, it's like in life, you know, in general, like when you go into the store, when I'm here and there, it's just kind of like, there is a perception, you know, sometimes. So just being, I think that's part of it, is just always being aware that I can't be perceived this way.
And like, oh, and just to jump off that, like one last little thing, that like, as you were saying, seeing people in more spaces beyond just oppressed spaces, like seeing us go to the store or work at a studio or like date or like laying in our pajamas, like eating Cheetos, like seeing us do people things, like also like those images are really powerful and they stay with people like out into the world, and people are more likely to start like changing how they perceive us when they see us in more spaces, just on it as regulars, and when we're not like a shocking presence that's there to create and to elicit a reaction, like when we're just kind of there. So there's a lot of value in that, to just being present and having us not be there for shock value per se.
Okay. Hey, my name is Avery, and firstly, I want to thank you all for sharing yourselves with us. I really appreciate that. You all spoke a little bit about having to assimilate to kind of, you know, be where you are, and I appreciate you voicing all of that. But my question is more toward, because both of you seem like authentic people, so my question is more towards that. And I was just curious, you know, as animators, what aspects of your authenticity or your uniqueness have kind of propelled you from where you started to where you are today? And yeah, if you could just kind of speak to that, that's kind of where my curiosity is. Thank you.
That is a great question. I think for me, yeah, okay. I think for me it's been about, unfortunately, kind of having to pick my battles very carefully, because the world's not, like, I wish, you know, every time something happened to me that was kind of uncool, I could speak out against it. But a lot of times it's being very strategic about and thinking about how I can be productive when I notice issues in the workplace or in the industry in general, thinking about things I can actively do to help improve those. And trying to maintain good relationships with people, even if those people are problematic, if those people are in positions of power that could eventually help elevate me to a point where I could be the one making decisions. Sometimes I'll be, it's terrible that we have to do it, but sometimes we have to work alongside people that don't have our best interests in mind, and really being able to preserve our sense of self in spite of that is very key, and picking those battles very strategically in ways that can actually be productive to you and moving forward. And it's unfortunate that we can't have everything we say automatically be taken as seriously as it is for them. But reaching that point where we kind of like realize that. And I think there's something to be said too about, like, I'm just true to myself, and people gravitate towards that. Like it's a kind of exhausting to go through sometimes when you don't just automatically fit people's expectations. But it also kind of really pays off in the long run, because people respect that you're going to give your honest opinion, you're going to be true to yourself, and that you're not going to compromise for anything. And I think those are good, like, leadership qualities that eventually will help you get to those points where you're the one making decisions.
Yeah, I think for myself, it was a lot of me learning who I am, you know, and me taking the time to figure out who is Davonne, you know, outside of being an animator, a filmmaker, and all these titles we give ourselves. Like, who is that person? And do I like that person, you know, and working on that person and realizing that all of this is temporary. Like, I could not have a job, you know, the show could be over, and then it's like, oh, well, you know, what are you doing now? So I think a lot of it was figuring out my identity outside of what I can do, you know, outside of my talents, and staying true to that person. So whenever I'm in a studio or a project comes along that I don't agree with, I can say, hey, that I don't represent that. I don't want to vibe with that, so I was okay with letting it go. It didn't make me feel like I was less of a person or anything like that, so I was staying true to myself in that respect, because at the end of the day, I wanted to be able to look at the things that I worked on and look at myself and say, hey, this is who Davonne is, you know? And also thinking about, instead of thinking of scarcity, like there's only so many spaces in terms of like, hey, it's just not time yet, you know? Like, if I really have something to say and share, my opportunity is gonna come, and I have to stay true to that. And then when it comes to people, usually when people are mistreating you or doing something unkind, it's more about themselves than it really is about you, you know? And hurt people hurt other people, so they're probably going through their own thing. So my mindset is like, how can I make this as painless as possible? You know, like how can I be how can I serve you? How can I help? But I don't take it personally, you know, in terms of like, you are dealing with something that's going on internally with you and you're projecting it on me. And that takes a lot of practice also. So I think, to summarize it, really getting to know who you are outside of the labels and the titles and what school you went to, where you worked, you know, who is that person, do you like that person, and growing that, because all the outside circumstances always change, and that'll also help you in how you interact with others. So.
Totally. And also, like, I totally agree. That's such great thoughts. And to add to that as well, that even if you're not in a place where you, like, it is important sometimes, like I said, we do have to sometimes work with people that radically disagree with us, or that even go so far as to, like, kind of delegitimize us and our voices, but they're in power, and there's this dynamic there. Even though that is a reality of the world that we live in, there is something to be said that even if you're not in a position of power, even if you're not, you know, this, like, super well-known artist that has 100 projects to pick, nobody ever has to make you do anything. If there's something you're not comfortable with, there's always going to be another opportunity. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like this is your chance, this is your only chance to get ahead. It's so, you know, if there's something about a project that feels really degrading to you, that feels really dehumanizing, even the way that they're treating you, if they go past a certain, like I said, there's going to be unfortunately problematic elements in a lot of creative directors still to this day. But if they're going to a point where they are crossing too many boundaries for you and it's too emotionally exhausting, you know, your mental health ultimately has to come first. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with saying no to a project that makes you deeply uncomfortable, and that makes you feel like that you can't be a part of. You at least want there to be some element of every project that you feel proud to be associated with. Like, just know that if you have to say no to something, there will always be more opportunities. And there will always, sometimes people will say too, like, if there's a really, really problematic director, that, like, that's just how people in the industry are. That's not true. There are so many more positive, enlightened people that are so much more respectful, and I see it every day. There's so many more people that think positively and that are respectful to their employees than not. So we never have to settle, basically, and just accept that this is how we're going to be represented and told. If there's something that really does deeply upset you, you don't have to be a part of that. And you can always be, even if you do have to work on a project that is a little compromising to you in some ways, or is somewhat uncomfortable, you could always still be working on your own stuff afterward and still be kind of actively pursuing maintaining your own identity and your own sense of self outside of that. So it's very complicated, obviously, but.
Yeah, definitely, like, thank you guys really much. Like, it's been really enlightening, and I think, like, it's really important that when we are talking about things, we're not just talking at you, but we're talking like with you guys as well. Because how do we have a panel about inclusion and animation when we're just talking at you? And the main thing is that, like, people who are listening, when you're listening, of course, you're going to have some things like that you want to ask, you want to talk about, and I think that's part of what makes the conversation. That's what makes a community, asking the tough questions. Sure, not everybody you will ask will have a positive reaction to what you will say, but it's also important to understand that that person might not represent everybody in that certain industry or that certain group as well too. Like we've mentioned here today, I think the big takeaway is everybody's an individual. So if you want to learn more about different people, I think you have to approach and see people as who they are as well too, and go into their story rather than see them as their oppression or like certain aspects of things. And while we're on that as well too, just as a quick ending note, I think it's very when we're at a certain point, it's a little bit more easier to look back and say, man, I don't like this project, I would say no. While as when you're starting out in the beginning, it might be more of I'm uncomfortable, but I don't know how to approach this, and I'm really not sure if it's me or if it's someone else or if it's whatever. And I think that's also part of how, certain people are like, oh, wow, how does this person who's so shady still work in the industry for such a long time and they seem to be getting away with it? Like there's studios that move around and you're like, but they just bankrupt another, in a studio in there, and how can they come here now? So I think that's the main thing, is the conversation needs to happen. We need to start addressing things slowly into a level we're comfortable with by saying things like, oh, I don't think this was right. I didn't feel this was right. And so therefore, let me bring up this conversation so that I can also get different point of views of whether it's me or is it something that's bigger than this, because that's also how movements start. That's also how the movement in Atlanta started, when they saw certain artists or certain studios not doing what they should do. When more and more people come forward, that's when you're able to actually stand as a group and say, yeah, you're not alone. This is not something that's just in your head as well. Yeah, so it's thank you guys for coming here today, and if you guys want to get to know more about the Palace, you can just come up, say hi, or whatever, and thank you guys for coming today.